outside. Yeah, that would be great, because I want an operations committee on Friday, February 17th, 2023. And due to the weather, we're kind of mixing things up a little bit here, and in the hope that we end early because some of us have drives. And we're going to start with a conversation about H46, which is the act related to the approval of the dissolution of Colchester Fire District Number 3. So we took this bill up yesterday, and I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
What are you moving? A motion to?
Moving to approve the Colchester Fire Department dissolution as sent to us by the House.
Excellent. Is there any discussion? All right, are we ready to vote? Clerk shall call the roll.
Senator Booth,
Yes.
Senator Morris. Yes. Senator Clarkson.
Yes.
Senator White.
Yes.
Senator Walker.
Yes.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Come around here twice.
My mistake. Just because I get 2 votes, I don't know.
Well, you're just gonna eliminate some.
You have to first meet. I get to vote on the dissolution of the Colchester Fire District Number 3 2 times. Excellent. So what is the vote?
The vote is 6-0-0.
Awesome. So Senator Vyhovsky is going to report this bill. So if you can take it up to the Secretary's office right away, then that would be awesome. And I know that you have to leave to take care of something. Is that right? Okay. So awesome. Thank you very, very much. Do you have the bill? Yes. For this one?
I got the vote.
Oh, clerk has it. Is that the copy that she has?
During our break, I have a favor to ask you, which I didn't get done when we were in the House, so I need to go back on.
Perfect.
I just give it to John or someone in that office.
Yes, exactly.
Everything was on Zoom when I was in the house.
Flower.
Yeah, exactly.
Flower,
Yeah.
okay.
Oh. You might have.
Okay.
In the summertime.
Okay.
I'll leave it if you don't want.
Well, I'm happy to share that. So it's
Great.
fine.
Very good.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Okay, so we are going to take a little testimony from the LCT first, if that's okay, Maria. Do you have?
Oh, sure.
Okay. Gwen Zakoff is on the computer, Zoom, whatever it's called. On that screen up there. Hi, Gwen.
Hello.
Here you are. Thank you for joining us. We are shifting to talk about emergency response communications or emergency operations. And as you, I think, know, we've been talking about this for the last few weeks. Emergency dispatch is another name for it. And we know that a lot of the municipalities have a stake in this. So we just wanted to hear from you, your thoughts, ideas, concerns, questions, all that. So if you're able to tell us what you'd like us to hear, that'd be great.
Sure. Thank you. Gwen Zakoff, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. Thank you for having VLCT in to talk about regional dispatching. We have been following this issue for decades. I've been following it for about a decade. I've personally been on some of the regional dispatch studies that the legislature put into place. I was on one of the committees, or the subcommittee, I should say, that was doing some of the scoring for the grant money that went through the legislature last year for those regionalization grants from DPS. So I know a little bit about this. And our our VLCT legislative policy does support regionalization of services in general, and more specifically for public safety services. There's obviously a recognition that this is the only means moving into the future to build capacity that makes sense to provide many of these sorts of services. It's not really an issue, but sort of, because we represent 247 distinct different communities coming from very different backgrounds. We have some of those communities who are PSAPs, who provide dispatching services on their own, others that contract out, others that rely on DPS. It's sort of every iteration we have. So it's not like we essentially have a position on how this sort of manifests in terms of figuring out how to provide an equitable system where everyone sort of pays in and everyone can get dispatching to their communities and their services in a manner that works for everybody. So I'll just, so what I really like to focus on is just sort of highlighting the issues that have just come to attention from all of these communities for the legislature. So I think the biggest issue has always been capacity and funding. So and I know there's funding that is coming from the federal government. The commissioner of DPS has flagged this for us, and it's really wonderful to see that. And so the best use of that is to support the dispatching services that currently exist and figure out how to fill the gaps in areas that currently do not have it. That would be ideal. That takes a lot of time and planning for sure, and something that will not happen overnight. We want to make sure that DPS and the state, as a state, we understand what role they play moving forward if and when they do cede any sort of, not control over, but don't provide any dispatching services for non-state agencies. What role does the state play, if any, especially when we're talking about having, interoperability, when we're talking about, God forbid things were to get really bad and services were to break down, where does the state step in and how? And what level of service and what level of authority and what kind of funding can the state provide moving into the future to help these dispatching services, either in existence or to come, work on technology upgrades, making sure that they're planning for the future, and again, have the resources they need to be the best that they can. So that's pretty much, those are the things we'd like to flag. And we don't really have an answer other than to say that the dispatching agencies that are working are great. So keep them in play as best you can. And I know that that's been, I listened into to the committee, and that's been an overarching theme that seems in which is great. The biggest challenge, I think, will be finding how to fill in the gaps that currently exist in regions that don't have anything currently set up. I think Rutland is probably the best example. Determining what regionalized really means. Does it mean geographically regionalized? That's a big question, because I think currently the funding that was approved for the dispatching services, either in existence or wanting to be onboarded, didn't really create sort of what I would call more of a regionalized model. And one last thing I'd like to bring to the committee, and I don't know if it was mentioned in earlier testimony, but a lot of this is not a new issue. So a lot of since the former commissioner, who's no longer there, started the conversation about whether or not the state was going to charge for dispatching. That happened several years back. There was great outreach done to municipalities and to these agencies. I think one of the things that I've sort of discovered is that, especially for ambulance services and EMS services, and they make up a hefty amount of those agencies that are being dispatched by the state. They were obviously made aware that there might be changes or to the system where they might not be into the future either having to pay for state dispatch or maybe not getting free dispatching anymore from the state. What hasn't happened, I think, is those municipalities that contract with those agencies, those nonprofits, they might not even know that they're not paying for dispatching. They might not know that there might be a lot of money that they're going to have to pay into the future when and if those agencies are now having to find new dispatching to contract out with. And it comes with a hefty price tag just because there's such a huge call volume for those agencies, which is a little bit different from fire. And a lot of those small towns don't have law enforcement, so that's not really as much of an issue. So that's just one thing I wanted to flag. I think that's, I don't know if that's been brought up before, but a lot of towns might not even know they're not paying for dispatching in those instances.
Yeah, that's a good point. So along those lines, has VLCT done any work or thinking about a funding formula or a funding source? So that is certainly one of our topics of discussion. Oh, you're muted.
That's the $1 million question, right?
Yeah.
That's always been the struggle because, I think the last report, mentioned maybe cannabis money, maybe, sports wagering money, if that ever went through.
All that money's already been spent like 25 times.
Exactly. And therein lies the problem. And then, why a while back, even, it's not the same conversation now, but the Universal Service Fund, there's been all sorts of options put on the table, but every one of those options has been shot down by the legislature for whatever reason, because it's not up to obviously these, subcommittees and study committees to make those determinations. They're just proposals that they might put forward. So we don't have another option. And I wish I did.
Okay, well, I guess I ask you to keep an open mind about whatever we come up with, because somebody has to pay for it. And since a lot of the existing sources don't make sense or are already allocated to something else, I think we're thinking about new sources. So if you have ideas, that would be great. If not, I just ask you to keep an open mind and help us work with your members to get the word out and get their feedback, but with an attitude of we need to make this work, not an attitude of no, please no. Senator Watson.
Yeah, thank you. So I am interested in getting to the formula that will work for folks, and to be fair, it may let's back up. So there's sort of the ideal budget of all the dispatch agencies, and that might even mean filling in the gaps that exist now. And then there's where we're at currently, and so one of the things that's on my radar is the transition from where we're at now to what's the ideal. And in order to do those calculations, one of the things that would be handy is if there were some kind of a spreadsheet. Oh, sorry, thank you. Some kind of data around what is there a list of what every municipality is currently paying for dispatch? Do you have?
Yeah, that's a good question. What are they?
Like I've got a list of, it's in that report from Paul White, of all of the dispatch centers and who contracts with them. And we have some information about what different municipalities or really what different agencies are paying for the dispatch, but it's not all coalesced into one place. But I think theoretically all of that information should be public. So I guess maybe that's one question. Do you think it's all public? Like, is it accessible somewhere? And to your knowledge, do you have it accumulated anywhere? Is it accumulated anywhere? Should we be asking someone else? Should we be doing that?
Because that would be useful.
It would be useful. Yeah.
So I don't know if Paul, I was in that group that put that report together. And so we actually had quite a bit of have a lot of conversations. I shouldn't say a lot, but we had at least a day of conversation about that very issue, about how do we figure out what's being paid, who isn't paying, what they're paying, what the structure is.
Right.
And the problem, it's not really a problem. And yes, it's public information. If there's a line item in a budget at the municipal level, that's all public information. Is it compiled anywhere? No. Sometimes that line item is not in its own line item and it's embedded into a larger budget. So it's really hard to sort of parse out what that might be. There are communities that do part-time dispatching with the state, so that, you know, there's so many different iterations, or they might contract, like in my community, we contract with 2 different ambulance services, but and they both dispatch on their own with different agencies, and then our volunteer fire department has our own. So we have 3 different dispatching within our own town. So we're not paying directly out of our budget a line item for those EMS services, but it's definitely absorbed into our overall budget that we pay to the ambulance service on a yearly basis. So we don't even really know what that is because it hasn't been parsed out. So therein lies the problem, is that even if you were to get every single city town budget and found the line item for dispatching, that's only going to tell you maybe a quarter of the story, because a lot of it you wouldn't be able to find because it's either not identified or it's hidden, not hidden, but you know what I mean? It's you know, it becomes somebody else's bill to pay, and you're only, you know, writing a check for an overall, you know, amount, and that what you're paying for dispatch is not really identified.
Yeah, it's embedded in a larger budget for
Right.
emergency services rather than just dispatch. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, data collection clearly needs to be part of our plan.
Yeah.
So the other question I have for you is if your members or you have talked about the structure of state level oversight. Excuse me, I have a peanut cut in my throat.
Maybe you need another pickle.
Yeah, so like we have the E911 board as sort of one model. We have other, you know, the department itself as another model. We have something completely new or some other agency or board. Do you have feelings about that or ideas about that?
We don't have a position on that necessarily, but we, you know, in our legislative policy, we do support the autonomy and the authority of the E911 board. There's a broad recognition from our municipalities that, you know, what the work that Barb Neal does, and that, you know, independent board has been really remarkable. I think there's sort of this standard that that we should be really proud of as a state. So perhaps looking to that as a model would make sense because it works so well. But that's just me gleaning, you know, from our policy saying that we support the E911 board and the model that's there. You know, I think having some level of independence, given that it's going to have, you know, some state, some, you know, county, some local sort of interplay. It makes sense for it to not necessarily just be embedded within, you know, DPS as its own thing and controlled by DPS and that level of oversight. I think there needs to be sort of a broader, you know, independent sort of perspective where that's kind of what the E911 board looks like.
So along those lines, given that the E911 board is so successful at what it does, what about expanding their duties and their scope of practice? I'm on the Health and Welfare Committee. Their, you know, and their staff and resources to be able to do both.
I would obviously defer to the board themselves. I can't speak to what their needs would be. I would just say that obviously if they're taking on more, they would need more capacity, but I think that they know so much of it, you know, like they specialize in the E911 part of it, not to this, but the learning curve to sort of step into a role, I think it wouldn't be so difficult.
Right.
But again, I don't know what their position would be.
Right. Yeah. We'll obviously ask them, and we have. But, okay. Are there other questions for Gwen at this moment? Okay, Gwen,
I mean, even if we don't have it broken down by town, by type of dispatch, do we have a total notion of what towns pay for dispatch as a total aggregate figure? I mean, a total figure.
not really, no. Stop shaking your head.
Not even a ballpark,
Yeah, so this is,
Not even a ballpark?
not even a ballpark estimate. No.
this is part of our
Yeah, no,
project.
I realize.
All right, Gwen, well, thank you. We will certainly want you to come back in once we have a bill to react to. And I know that you're watching, so if you have ideas, let us know.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Be safe out there. Okay,
Is that generally we say in the world? Or
because of the weather. Well, that too, just generally. be safe.
I was gonna say,
Um,
after taxes, yes, I have no idea.
So we're gonna have a little bit of a discussion now with Maria and Stephanie. If you guys, do you want to come up to the table? So Maria is going to drafting whatever bill we come up with, and Stephanie is going to be helping us with the money part of it. So, you know, I wanted them to come in, and I've asked Senator Watson to work with me on this, so that she's the point person with me on dispatch. So that I'm not alone.
You're not alone. You have a whole committee of support.
I know that, but we all only have so much. So this is a job I've given to her and others. I've talked to each of you about jobs you're gonna have on different bills. So we talked to Maria and Stephanie a little bit, and are trying to flesh out sort of the state level oversight and funding parts of it. I don't know if you have anything you want to say before we just sort of dive into a conversation about it.
Not particularly. What I'm, in terms of drafting, you know, what's the end goal? Where would you like to be? And then the transition getting there. What information do you need? What needs to happen? So
Yeah,
that's just very good picture. And if you have ideas
okay.
of the end goal, that might.
Okay, so that's a great place to start. Let's start with the end. And do you guys want to just introduce yourself? And then I just welcome you to be at the table as part of the conversation. So if you have things you want to add or ask as we're talking, please just jump in or wave to me. So go ahead.
Sure. Maria Royal with Legislative Council.
And I'm Stephanie Barrett with the Joint Fiscal Office. And I'll just say a few quick words on the money side of this equation. Senator Hardy asked a few weeks ago to start thinking about how a funding structure would work, and the difficulty you just heard about understanding even what the baseline is, that it's embedded all over the place in this mishmash of a system. But I'm thinking of, in terms of one of the examples, when we set up the cannabis board, we set up the ability for them to set fees, but we didn't set the fees. They came back and set fees. And so a structure, especially as you are, you know, you have an end goal, but you have not wanting to break things that work right now, how that regionalization, you might end up with some regional fees that eventually become all statewide, because you might be doing, you know, the filling in the gaps might be the first place that fees are set, and then they get, and it's going to be a challenge politically and fiscally as you get there. But I think, you know, the types of fee structures are pretty straightforward. They're probably population-based, call-based, maybe some baseline, single, you know, one payment, and how, you know, the ideal in my mind is that a region gets to a budget and that's, you know, working, as opposed to a statewide distribution. But the power of whatever you're setting up to levy those and to make sure that they're, you know, people are feeling that they're fair and the regions that are being fairly funded is the challenge in this, so that, I'll stop there.
Thank you for mentioning the Cannabis Control Board and them reporting back to us on fees. That, I think that's a helpful thing to consider, actually, given we, Ann and Senator Watson and Maria and I had a conversation yesterday about the fee structure, and we quickly got sort of tangled up in it. And clearly there's no data, or there's very little data, inconsistent data. So being able to, I think, collecting data needs to be kind of job one in terms of figuring out what a fee structure would add anything.
Well, it's not exactly about this, so if there's more that you want to say, I don't want to interrupt the.
No,
I'm sorry, I might have to hop up in a few minutes to go to a technical amendment next door on the.
that's fine. Yeah, you can come and go as you need to, Stephanie,
Okay.
if you're busy. Thank you. All these notes about S5, what's that though?
Somebody has mobilized the negative vote, which is too bad, because it's such a positive bill.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so, thank you, I appreciate that, I mean, even with, I really like the idea of coming up with perhaps even a structure of a formula, but without being specific, and then asking folks to,
Whatever this entity is to make their recommendations about
Yes.
the best structure, and it may be, time limited for
Right.
certain, until you get the full regionalization.
Right. But one of the things that I think this, whatever bill that we pass should do is it should answer the question that the working group's report basically came back with, the question of whose responsibility is dispatch? Like, I think if we can answer that question, like that actually sets us on a path to fill in all the rest of the details, even if we say, here are some placeholders, come back and fill them in.
Yeah, I agree, because it needs to be, well, in that case was the Cannabis Control Board who was in control.
Yeah.
And then there are other, the E911 board or the Vermont Broadband Board or the whatever. Board of Medical Practice, which is what we were talking about this morning. So whatever kind of board or entity, I agree. So can we, go ahead if you.
Well, that might, this is a still coagulating thought, but, thinking that we may be able to not. I'm gonna let this thought still percolate a little
Okay.
bit. Sorry.
So
thank you.
no, that's fine. I totally get it. I think Maria's question about what is our end goal is a really good one. So I wonder if we could at least flesh that out, and that could start to become the intent kind of section of the bill. So I can start, but if somebody else wants to start, Bob, yeah, you want to start? What should be the end goal?
For dispatch.
Well, the end goal should be to provide dispatching services for all individuals throughout the state of Vermont, to be quite honest. But
I like that.
Sorry, say that one again. Oh, I heard all individuals in the state.
all individuals and or communities throughout the state of Vermont should be our end goal, to provide emergency service dispatch to all entities throughout the state of Vermont. You can thumb up or thumb down, or don't.
So basically all communities and residents and visitors of Vermont.
Should all have access to, should all have great dispatch.
Emergency service
So-
dispatch.
All be served by, you can make it pretty.
Universally available dispatch.
Yes, there you go, yeah.
Yes.
Emergency, and so here's the other question is, do we want to call it emergency dispatch services or the emergency communication services? That's a little bit broader, or what?
So communications is the critical piece of this, because it is uniting and making a 21st century communication system work effectively to, what we're doing is responding to emergencies, and that is done using our technology and using our on-the-ground knowledge. So it's a combination of things. But it's critically important that we, in this, and that's why I like your idea of calling it communications, because it's critically important that in this next effort, we unite our best technologies with our best understanding of local communities.
Okay, so it meets the needs of local communities essentially.
Well,
And
I don't know, I'd say more than that. I mean, we really need to deploy a 21st and 22nd century technology to understand where the emergency is, how we can, and the speed with which we can respond. I mean, this is all technology in addition to the on-the-ground understanding of where the emergency is. So it's one of the reasons people like local dispatch is because they think that local understanding is going to deploy people faster to a very specific area. It's like that whole debacle in your neck of the woods with Ripton, when that person was lost up on the mountain and no one was speaking to each other, and it was just, you know, it was about 2 months ago. And it was a disaster.
okay, Senator Watson.
Thinking about the difference between emergency communications and dispatch, and the emergency communications being broader, I could picture that including the E911 folks, where it's dispatch might be thought of as the one step sort of after the PSAPs. And I think we may want to include them in this conversation. So
Yeah,
for now, I like emergency communications.
yeah, okay, good, you good with that?
Okay.
I also think it reminds me of the testimony we got from the ambulance
Yes,
people, and they
yeah.
were talking about bringing more people into being first responders and how do we meet the
Yes.
needs that are broader than what the traditional emergency services
I like
are.
that.
So, okay, emergency communications instead of just dispatch, and that all communities would have. And I also equitable access, because I think right now what we have is really inequitable, both from a cost perspective and payment perspective, and also from a service perspective. Some communities have pretty gold standard service, and some have less gold service standard, maybe bronze service. Senator White.
Thank you, Chair Hardy. The one piece that I feel like, I don't know if it falls into kind of our overall vision, but it's like a do no harm to the services that are currently working well. I think that's something we've heard a lot in testimony, is whatever you do, don't, if we're doing it well as a community, don't make it worse for us.
Right.
So I think of it as like a do no harm, but I also respect that there are going to be folks who will most likely be paying for a service that they previously have not been paying for, in a way that is, I mean, they've been paying for it,
Yeah.
but this is now a different and potentially a harmful change in their mind. So I don't know how to capture.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important for us to communicate to everyone that everybody pays for it now. It's just the way that they pay for it is different, and some is more visible than other
Yes.
payments, because some of it's more indirect because it's general fund payment at the state level. I also think we have to be really careful. I agree that we don't want to mess up what's already working, but that is sometimes subjective, because there is going to be change for every community in the state, including the communities that are doing a really good job now, like yours. Things are going to be different, and how it's maybe funded and provided may be different, but hopefully it will be as good and just maybe slightly different.
Yeah, I would love to capture like that sentiment. I don't know how to.
But to go to that, and that's part of our problem too, because it's a total patchwork.
Yeah.
So if we're really trying to design a system that is seamless, that involves the highest technologies and local expertise, if we're trying to do all that, that may not honor everything that exists at the moment.
True. Yeah.
It just may not. And so, and when you ask whose job it is, it's the fundamental job of state governments. I mean, I'm sorry, emergencies in any capacity are the job of the state or the Fed, it's a job of government to help. I mean, that's whether they like government or not, that's where everybody turns to first.
Yeah, I think that needs to be.
Government is good in this.
Because this question kept getting asked to us and I was confused by this question. I think that emergency communication services are a fundamental services of state government in partnership with local
And in
government.
partnership with feds.
And in partnership with the
The
feds.
feds
because
are hugely important in this
Yeah.
piece, because we
So,
rely on.
I
federal-
think we just answer that question in the
Yep.
bill because that seems like a silly question, but it also
No.
keeps getting asked, so let's answer it.
Senator Watson. Well, so in relation to that, I wonder if it makes sense to, I think about the dispatch centers that are functional, that are good right now, right? And if it is the responsibility of the state, then could we think of dispatch centers as sort of being ordained or like, identified as being like, yes, you're good. We're gonna collect, right now, they're collecting, this is kind of getting to the formula, but like, right now, they're collecting money directly from other municipalities or contracts, whatnot. If that instead goes through the state and then gets redistributed to the places that we have sort of designated as like, yes, you are, you've met certain standards of interoperability or of training or what have you, right? Like if all these boxes are checked, then you get to, have money flow back to you. Anyway, that's how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, so setting the state needs to set standards.
Yeah.
The state needs to set standards for both service and technology, I think,
Yes.
because that's an important thing. And also identify gaps in service
Yep.
or gaps in coverage, the sort of dead zone concept. I wonder, so the state level oversight in terms of an entity to do it and then a transition to whatever we consider to be the permanent entity, because we can't immediately create something and have them take over. So, or it's difficult to do that anyway. So how do we create a transition and what's that timeline and who does that?
So.
Yeah, I know it's tough.
It is tough. I just go back, if I may, go back to the state's fundamental job of state government. E911 is a state entity. It receives all the 911 calls, there are some, it's my understanding that, and forgive me, but do all the initial 911 calls come through that filter, or do some initial straight 911 calls go to Hartford, for example?
Oh, Hartford is a PSAP, I
Yeah.
believe. So there's some of them, they all go through the PSAPs.
Yeah.
So,
So they go, no, but the 911 calls go into 911.
No, they come to us.
So some go
Some of them
straight,
are-
but some go to 911, some go to the PSAPs.
they're all 911. The PSAPs
Are
are
part of
yeah.
the 911 system, right? Okay, I'm
I
just
think
trying
it
to figure.
depends geographically where you are.
Right,
is
where
the
your,
answer to that
where your phone
question.
is. Right.
So
No, I'm
let's
just-
not get in, I'd rather not
Yeah,
get
yeah,
into
no,
this
no, I was
right
just trying
now.
to think
What
of
I,
what we're
yeah,
already doing.
yeah. So I think that rather than talking about the like technical details, let's stay away from that right now, please. I would like to talk about governance,
Yeah.
transition, funding, and goals, period. That's it. None of don't get into the technology.
Yeah, no, I was just trying to figure out the umbrella.
Center White.
Thank you. So I have two thoughts, which is the report that we got.
Yeah.
While it doesn't answer the questions, I think they're, the three things we actually asked them to do in the report are kind of the three or four things, or actually the four things that we're trying to do. So I would ask that we consider just looking at the recommendations that we asked them to bring us that they didn't, as they admit, they didn't quite bring to us.
Yeah.
And then the second piece that I wanted to talk through was You know, I feel like the E911 board has to have a role in this. The governance structure has to be fleshed out. So I would want us to have in our overarching findings something to that effect. Maybe it's not calling out the specific organization that we want to have the overarching governance structure or putting it into DPS like that. I don't know if we need to call in the findings. That's probably a much bigger policy
We're not gonna
discussion.
do findings right now. No, like the intent, findings are the
Our
last
intent is
thing
what
we're
I
gonna
think.
do. Yeah, we need to, in the bill, have who is gonna be in charge.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm gonna just tell you that I think we need to be moving to a structure that E911 is part of the governance solutions. We need to expand their duties and their capacity and their resources and create a transition plan to get there so that we're not doing it overnight. And we obviously will hear from them. I'm telling you this, Barb, we'll hear from you on it. But they are, I would like to build on their success and I think that they have the capacity and the expertise so that we're not like reinventing the wheel. And it may involve changing their structure a little bit in terms of the membership. But I think it makes sense to do that. But in the meantime, we need to create a structure to get to that point. So, yeah.
Well, and to that point, I liked with the reference to the Cannabis Control Board that there were feedback cycles. I think we need to build that in as well.
Yes, agreed. I think in terms of the entity or the group that would be the bridge from our current situation to a new, improved, expanded, well-resourced emergency communication board or whatever we end up calling it. Who is the entity that you all imagine could be doing that? Or entities?
Well, so I mean, I guess I've got it two ways in my head. One is that
Bob, don't leave.
is that whatever board that we are envisioning would oversee this in the end is also the transition organization, like that it's sort of one flows right into the other. Another possibility is that we're setting up a temporary group to just oversee the transition. And I it's not clear to me which, I guess I'm leaning towards having a transitional group. I want to check by thinking about that. Or are you thinking of like who should be on that transitional?
Well, I just want to check in with Maria right now, because I think that the Department of Public Safety is the one that has the funding right now and
For dispatch?
yeah, the $20 million that is sort of on the table. And that they have that's more of a Stephanie question, but I'm pretty sure that they do. And that they have been sort of tasked with trying to help set up these local dispatch operations that don't exist right now.
Yeah.
That's when they were going to give out the grants. That's what they talk about in that report. And so I think Department of Public Safety has to have a role in the transition and potentially in the sort of permanent structure as well. So maybe it's a combination of Department of Public Safety and E911.
But I think your idea of the E911 expanding the E911 board is absolutely spot on. I think and I think for the transition, you want to have all the people with whom it's currently working well, like Lamoille and Hartford. You know, you want to have representation from, and then of course buy-in from all the groups who may be having to give up a piece of what they're currently doing if we're going to pull it in under a single governance umbrella.
Yeah.
I mean, I would want to have, I think in the transition, you'd want to have E911, obviously, DPS, and some of the key players
For the largest.
that have done it successfully.
I mean, Vermont State Police, I think they
Well,
should.
that's DPS.
Yeah, but they should have, I think there's a difference between DPS and,
Yeah,
yeah, I would say I'd almost want them to have, if are we envisioning a transition board? Is that kind of what we're discussing?
Well, maybe not, it doesn't have to be a board.
it doesn't necessarily have to be a board,
task
but,
force, I mean, a job, it's a task, they've got a task to do to. Oh,
but somebody who's in charge of the transition, basically.
And I think if we're gonna put somebody in charge, it should be who we're hoping to actually have ultimate governance over it. And so maybe E911 needs to be in charge.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know who else you would be proposing, but.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, just thinking about, with the transition, it might be, I mean, it's possible that we could just list all the stakeholders, that would be a part of it. So like, do we actually get, a dispatcher, or do we get, someone who is, a part of the group that would be dispatched, like an ambulance person, you get, like there's.
And some of
Some
those people are
representation.
already represented on the E911
Yeah.
board
Okay.
itself, and some of them, yeah, we could, if they're
So
not
let's-
represented.
Yeah.
Believe me, we do a really good job of creating long
Lots of
lists of
boards.
everybody.
Yeah, right.
But let's look who's on the E911
Yeah.
board currently, then maybe that's
Yeah.
a good idea.
All right, we'll, so we're gonna talk for just a couple more minutes, then we're gonna move on, and then Ann and I are gonna work with Maria on sort of more specific drafting
But I think we-
instructions. We just wanna hear the sort of overall goals.
Was that helpful?
Senator Norris, do you have other things that you wanna add that we make sure we cover?
I'm sorry, I stepped out.
No, that's
Did I miss
okay.
anything?
I get it. I was giving you a hard time about it. Cause I mean, I think your experience of having been needing the dispatch services for your operation is important, and I wanna make sure that you feel like we're on the right track.
Well, you're on track.
Okay.
It's I think finding the wording, getting the intent that we're all looking for is one thing. The job after that is going to be
Yeah.
strenuous work that takes place
Well-
throughout the state. I have no personal thoughts on it.
This is your moment,
Say what are your
Well, this
personal.
is my moment.
Yeah, say what your personal thoughts are,
as
I think
opposed to
that-
your non-personal.
unless you don't want to. You know?
No, I think the E911 board and the faculties and facilities that they bring forth should remain intact as an E911. And I think that when we look at dispatching and throughout the state, there's a lot of regional or close to regional dispatching already set up within the state. And, understanding 911 call takers versus dispatchers and the duties they all both perform, is you can see why you want to at least keep them separate. The E911 is basically taken care of right now. And it's throughout the state with our PSAPs that we have. And we have 6 PSAPs throughout the state. And I think that when we look at regional dispatching, we should look at our regional dispatching and separate the two.
Well, I don't think what we're suggesting is that the E911 board or the state would be doing the dispatching, just that there'd be a state entity that oversees the regional
Oh,
dispatching.
they don't want to do dispatching, right? You know that.
Yeah,
right?
So that there's somebody who's sort of, in charge of making sure that all the standards are met, that that all of the areas of the state have coverage, that there's interoperability, that there's failover, that there's all those lovely things that we've talked about a lot. But that the actual dispatching itself would be done regionally.
Are you looking at getting together a group of individuals who are very knowledgeable to do the oversight on, or a civilian oversight? Or, I don't know why you wouldn't at least check with the Department of Public Service to see what their thoughts may be on this.
Both DPSs, that's a good point.
We had them in here, and what their testimony was, that they personally didn't want to oversee it.
That was the
So-
Department of Public Safety, right?
Oh, Department of
No,
Public Service.
You
Department
say
of Public
DPS,
Oh, okay.
because that goes to the telecommunications.
Yeah, yeah.
Broadband.
Okay, yeah, so we'll have Department of Public Service in.
Yeah, that's when we talk about the communications piece, it's key to have both DPSs in.
Yeah, and that's a good idea. And we'll obviously have E911 back in as well, and Department of Public Safety, all of them back in. But in terms of the funding formula that Senator Watson and I were talking about, sort of a lot of the formulas that are used already have a base payment and then a per call sort of formula, right? You wanna?
Sure, yeah, I can talk about that. So just checking out the report that came from the working group. Almost all of them had some kind of a base fee, and a few of them had a per capita rate, but all of them effectively had a call volume percentage rate that they would charge for. So, and some of them, they dealt with it somewhat differently. Some of them were like, if you had 100 calls, it was one fee. If it was 200 calls, it was more. But it effectively came down to a call volume rate as
So
well.
base fee plus call volume.
Yes, and so, when I think about how do we, if we were going to create our own formula, those are the two pieces that seem essential.
Mhm.
And this is something that I think we'd want to check back on, or have task the transition group to think about, would be, does that cover effectively tourists? Does that cover that the equity piece of rich towns versus poorer towns? And my inclination is to think that I think it probably does, because if you're a center, if you're getting a lot of tourism, you're going to have more calls, and that should be reflected in the call volume percentage rate. So that's how I'm thinking about it. And then I think there are some potentially philosophical or policy-oriented decisions to be made around what the base fee is and where you set the base fee. How does that motivate towns to join a regional dispatch, or just stay with the state or whatnot? But that's either a conversation we can have, or I could also picture just leaving it as an open formula without numbers, to say, here are the different variables in the formula. Dear transition organization, come back and tell us what you think those rates should be within this formula. And that's.
If I might ask, so does anybody know what universal tax fee brings in for the state of Vermont?
Yeah.
Universal Service Fund,
Yeah.
it's
It
not nearly as much, not nearly enough.
What's the starting point is it all?
It's about $5 million, but
What is it, Maria?
it's about $5 million right now, but it covers more than just 911, although the bulk of the money goes to 911. I think they got about 4 million of that. It was a little bit more, 5 million last year. That didn't cover the 911 budget. So they got an extra 1.3 million in general fund dollars.
Yeah, so the Universal Service Fund is not even covering 911 at this point.
What is the total fund we're looking for what do they cost per year, 911, throughout the state?
Their budget is
So it's
around
about
five.
$5.3 million just for 911.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's not a viable funding source, because it's not even covering what it's supposed to
No,
cover.
I had no idea after
Yeah.
many years I've been in this, that's what
Yeah.
it costs around 911.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that having the general funding formula parameters in the bill, but then maybe coming back and having them report like what the fees, the actual base
Right.
fee and per call fee,
Right.
should be, maybe is a good idea, kind of along the lines of the Cannabis Control Board idea. But Senator Watson and I were talking about how we need to collect the fees from the local entities, municipalities or whatever, and then have the state redistribute the funding to the actual dispatch agencies, so that everybody's paying in and then everybody's getting their services paid for, so that there's not this sense that some people are paying a different fee or different place or different mechanism, which is what we have right now. Senator White.
Thank you, Chair Hardy. So, well done on your numbers, just knowing them off the top of your head, by the way.
First.
You were exact, 5.3 million, is exactly right. So what we have not talked about yet, though, is we could expand the universal service fee. We could
Great.
change, yeah, and so,
Well-
so is that something that we are considering in this conversation as well? Because we got a report back that said we could.
You could.
We talked about this in the finance committee at length, and I guess we should have this conversation with when Stephanie's here. She knows more of the numbers off her top of her head. But one of the problems with the universal service fund is thank you, is it is on landline.
You're losing your.
On voice service.
Voice service, and more and more of is data these days. And so the base from which we're charging the
Is
fee is
diminishing.
diminishing.
Sort of like the gas tax.
Oh,
So
but
it's a similar
taxes.
thing as there's change in technology, there's, and if, efficiencies, that the sort of ability to get that revenue is shrinking.
Okay.
Go ahead, Maria.
Well, I was just gonna say, because it's for your situational awareness related to this, right? So the fee now is a percentage of your voice bill, 2.4%. There, in order to stabilize the fund, there is a proposal, and other committees are talking about it, is to charge a flat connection fee, right? So 70 cents per voice line. That was one proposal. That would raise enough to level fund the existing programs and eliminate the declining percentage revenue.
Right.
Right, so there are
Yeah.
conversations, and again, right now, they've been looking at just level funding the existing programs that it's meant to cover. I'm just mentioning that because to the extent you wanted to
I
think of a
think,
higher fee.
right,
you know, that-
I think it would be difficult to raise sufficient funds to do both 911 and dispatch at that, with that. I mean, I think it would have to be significantly bigger fee. If we're talking about 70 cents, then it might need to be like $1.40, because we can certainly look at that as an option, but I think it might be difficult.
We did get a report on this topic that it says about $1. When you
Yes.
look at the-
For 911.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you were talking, Maria, about lines. If every account on a monthly basis, I mean, every phone account, no matter whether it's cell, land, anything, pay a fee, that would, is that what you were talking about?
Well, I
You were
was
talking about
using
lines?
line, it was too restrictive, so every voice connection, and, within some limitations, for example, if a household has, a number of users that all have cell phones, right, so they're in other states, they say one line is 70 cents, and then it declines for each additional line in a household or business that has 25, 100 lines, a hospital, school, whatever, they might not pay per line, so, but it's, when I said line, I don't necessarily mean
You mean
telephone line, it can be a
every-
cellular service.
Every
Yeah,
entity that is making phone calls or able to make.
right,
phone
and there's some discretion, like I said, about whether every account in a household or in a business should pay 70 cents, or whether it should, roughly approximate what they're paying now.
I'll just say I'm skeptical of using the universal service fund, given the challenges of it for even funding 911. So,
Unless we make it mean more, I mean, it's up, we can make it mean more and figure out how we do that.
yeah. And that also, ultimately, the funding decisions aren't going to be made in this room. It's going to be in one of those rooms.
We make funding recommendations and we do the groundwork. and
Yeah.
They don't wanna have to redo all their work, so if we can do the groundwork on this and make recommendations, that's brilliant. They're gonna, of course, accept it.
Of course, yes, of course. All right, I think we're gonna move on right now. Maria, do you have a little bit that you can start working on and maybe that you and
I-
Senator Watson and I can
Sure,
touch base?
yeah, absolutely. I think, I mean, I'm already hearing like a data collection, like really figuring out what do you need, like in order to come up with a budget.
Right.
You need a better figure for what people are paying. So however you go about asking towns to get that information, look at their own budgets. But somehow that needs to be reported to this entity, because you need a budget.
And I think you've got some intent and you've got a notion
Got
of
some
whose job it
intent,
is.
and then maybe other data, the inventory of not just services, but dispatch facilities themselves. What do they have? What equipment, as you think about kind of statewide standards to
Yeah.
bring everybody up to the. And what
Yeah.
kind of database you'll need. Yeah, so I
Yeah.
think so. I think I
Okay.
have some.
Senator Watson?
I love the idea of an equipment inventory as well as a part of the data collection. In addition to just like budget numbers. It seems to me that it would be logical to have a data collect, not data, a section that addresses fund collection and a section that addresses fund distribution. So that's yeah, and then a section about transition. I guess I'm just thinking about like what are the big
Yeah.
chunks.
Yeah.
We can talk about more.
Yeah, so why don't we move on if you have enough to get started with, and then let's.
And the Department of.
Do you have Monday off? I can't remember. Is that?
Technically it's off, but I will be working.
Okay, well, I
Monday.
may touch on Monday.
Okay.
Just briefly to
Sure.
check in.
Yeah.
Okay,
Great.
thank you very
You're
much.
Just on inventory and
Yes.
we need telecommunications inventory also. So the Department of Public Service is key on this as well, because,
Thank you.
it's, I think that's a piece of the holistic is where if we're looking at this as emergency communications, we need to have that as well, that inventory.
Okay,
Okay.
great, thanks, Maria.
Sure.
Okay, we're gonna quickly move on and try to get in a little bit more work before we.
It doesn't look so bad.
I don't know why, what it
It's
is.
so fast.
Do you know what it is in our next meeting?
Hey, we're still getting out of here for it. And look at the keyword. She said, let's go at 1 o'clock.
What?
Olivia, I love your new screensaver.
Yeah, I need to get it bigger, but.
Well, shoddy, somebody should be able to.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, Addison County's going berserk. They don't clearly
Jason,
want to spend every fossil fuel penny.
The other Ann.
All right.
Thank you.
That's the
It's
image
from
on the
Montpelier.
top of the gap, and that's what I always look at. before.
Yeah, I'm not going to ask that. Okay. I'm just trying to decide whether I go over the Middlebury Gap.
I think you
and
don't
through
wanna go over.
And through,
This is show.
Yeah.
Oh, dear. It's going.
no, we're gonna start with Mike.
Never mind, Chair Hardy.
Yes, I think-
Got your one.
I think so. Yeah, because you're here and
Like, I gotta go. I gotta get out of here.
so we're shifting to S9 to talk with Mike Fisher. Who are you? With Mike Fisher. He asked to testify after our conversation the other day. So as you recall, this is the bill about the powers of the auditor to audit information or receive information from entities that contract with the state. So.
Good afternoon, Mike Fisher, healthcare advocate, good to be here.
Ooh, it's good to have you. I'm gonna go.
Okay.
And I think I can say on a very high level, so we at the healthcare, I work for the healthcare advocates office. We, in addition to running a helpline that serves all Vermonters who are having access to care problems, we also are a public advocate in many procedures. Sometimes private entities accountable. And so we were a little bit surprised. We were surprised by the Supreme Court decision last year. Thought it was obvious to us that in order for there to be an effective audit following the dollars, the state dollars, that we would have to be able to follow those dollars into private entities who are contracted. I asked myself the question, what percent of the state budget flows through private contracts? By the way, I work for Vermont Legal Aid. I am fully funded by state dollars. I am a private contract. And so I am just, a tiny, but an example of that. And we were surprised by the decision. We think that obviously the auditor needs to be able to follow those monies, those state dollars. We also, similarly to the auditor's office, we also at the Healthcare Advocate's Office get to see confidential information and take that very seriously. It's a big deal. Any question of whether my office or the auditor's office is can reasonably see confidential information is a big deal. The auditor's office gets to see a lot of confidential information, and I'm confident that, like us, they would take that seriously. I don't have any questions of their ability to manage that. And then lastly, the last high-level point is the obvious one. This is not about Auditor Hoffer. We may like him, we may hate him. This is not about him. This is about the structure of state government. This is about the person who comes after him and the person after that and the person after that. And so those are the high-level points that we wanted to make in support of this thing.
Great, thank you. Senator Witt.
Thank you, Chair Hardy. So we did hear testimony previously from folks who are in the healthcare industry who were opposed to this. I'm wondering if, from your perspective, what accountability measures. So I feel like the point they were making that I'd love to get a response on is we are already deeply scrutinized. This is just going to be an additional level of scrutiny that's unnecessary. I'm wondering if you have a response to that in your very unique.
The answer is maybe. The answer is yes, there are parts of the healthcare industry that have a great deal of scrutiny, and there are parts of the healthcare industry that have next to no scrutiny. And maybe next to no scrutiny is too strong. There are varying levels. And I certainly wouldn't want the auditor's office or anybody to be duplicating efforts that are being, well reviewed, duplicating efforts to hold accountable that where we're already holding those entities accountable. It doesn't rise to the level of saying no, the auditor's office shouldn't have this. Hey, I fully understand. I say again, I'm a contractor. I have to, provide a report every quarter. I have to do all kinds of things. I have to meet with the administration. I have to submit an RFP every couple of years, and where they, I have to submit a proposal. No one would want extra scrutiny. I wouldn't want extra scrutiny. And yet, it's pretty darn important that we have structures to do it. And so I don't begrudge them for saying, don't make us do more administrative hurdles. I understand why they would say that. And yet, I think it's very important that we still have the structure.
Thank you.
Senator Norris, did you have a question?
Yes, thanks. We also took testimony from some individuals who doesn't necessarily have a problem with the auditor coming in and taking an audit, whatever else, nor would I. But their concerns were that just how far his audit should go as far as looking at profit, and because it's really, we're concerned about state dollars and where they go, what they're used for. So what a business is making or profiting is really not our concern. In fact, the state accepts their contract. What are your thoughts on that?
And I heard about some of that exchange, and I have to admit that I did not listen to all the testimony that was given. I think to the extent that we ever saw an auditor overstepping their bound and doing something improper, I think we would, well, I don't know exactly, we would have to address that. I think,
But that's not my question.
yeah,
I'm not saying anybody's gonna overstep their bounds.
the
That's the
concern about the
the
possibility.
concern about, no, the concern about opening up what their profit and margin gains and losses are. So when you get competitive bids from other entities, they now can go and say, oh, he's making this, whatever. So look, what we were hearing. I'm not an auditor.
The
so-
sort of proprietary information.
Yeah, that's what we heard from
So
Associated General.
that goes to the question of whether the auditor will keep proprietary information confidential or not. And that's what I meant to be talking about earlier. Much like my office, hey, I get information about contracts between private parties. In my work, my office gets information that is marked as confidential, is determined to be confidential, is marked as confidential, and it's a big deal to keep that information confidential. Making it would be a big deal, and it's sort of such a big deal, that it doesn't rise to the level of me having a concern about it, that the concept that the auditor's office is going to make public private financial, information that would give another entity a competitive advantage. I just don't see that happening. I understand the concern about it, but I don't have that concern.
Well, they do.
I understand.
Senator Watson.
Yeah, thanks. So one of the things that I've been wrestling with in this is it feels like there's something fundamentally different between, the processes that we have for paving and, and also the situation that we have with the hospitals. And so, so this is my ignorance here, but do the hospitals go through a competitive bid process like, because that's what I think of as, for contracting for paving, let's say, as an example, right? There's a job that needs to happen, goes out to bid, we see who all the players are, and then we pick the lowest one. Yeah. But with healthcare, it seems to me that we're in more of a monopolistic kind of situation. And so I don't know if it goes out to bid in the same way. And I wonder if that is a ring that we can draw around. Because we're not really worried about the construction contractors. Like we're worried about this. I'm gonna stop talking now with that question. How does that work?
I think you're right. There really is a difference here.
Yeah.
That, sort of, because we have the network of Vermont hospitals that we don't have hospitals, and hospital service areas that are distinct. There's a corner in Philadelphia where you have 3 hospitals on 3 of the 4 corners. And so, we don't have dynamics like that here in Vermont, thankfully. No, we don't, that I can think of, have, we have state dollars flowing to Vermont hospitals and providers to provide care for Vermonters who choose those providers to get their care.
So could you, I guess I'm wondering if we could accomplish the same thing by allowing the auditor access to this and other sort of similarly non-bidded either contracts or.
So, and that I would have to say, I don't know.
Yeah, non-bid, non-competitive, yeah.
I don't know enough to know the answer to that question. I would be curious about the auditor's perspective on, what does the performance audit mean? What is it that they're after when they're asking for financial information?
Right, thank you.
So I'm curious about, so we got a nice overview from our legislative council about the Freedom of Information Act and Open Records Act at the state level, and the sort of layers of scrutiny that goes into if there's a request for open records how an office determines whether or not they're gonna release certain information. And you mentioned that your office has a lot of confidential information, probably a lot of information that's also protected by HIPAA and other federal requirements. So how does your office deal with open records requests, and who is the person that makes that determination for your office?
Well, so I don't think we're subject to open records requests. I mean, I think
Freedom of information.
we're a private,
Oh,
entity.
right.
and so,
This was the point, is that
Yeah.
private entities don't want to share records with a public entity, because then they would be
Right.
subject to the open records law.
but not if it's deemed not subject to the open records law because of, it would advantage.
But it wasn't just about competitiveness, because, I mean, I think that there was a concern about personnel records and protected healthcare records and things like that being in the hands of the state government per se, then that would make them open for access.
Yeah.
But, so this, I think the competitive advantage type thing was specific to like the paving thing, yeah.
What did we bid for this?
Yeah.
And you're right, we do have a great deal of personal health information.
Yeah.
Health information, identifiable, in the course of our supporting Vermonters. But we also, because we're a party to the insurance rate review case, for instance, we are copied on information that the board requires of the hospitals or of insurance companies.
Okay, well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate you coming to visit us
Yeah.
and share your perspective.
Thank you.
think we
I
have
missed
some-
it, but I'm gonna watch it on YouTube.
I'm sure you
we have the auditor, I think, with us on Zoom. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello, Mr. Auditor. Thank you for joining us.
It's just out front.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Global
we're-
warming has hit us again.
We're commenting on your photo behind you. It looks nicer than it actually is here. Well, you've heard our discussions over the last couple days with some people who've raised some issues with S9. So I know you wanted a chance to come back in and talk with us. So why don't you tell us what you think we should hear at this point?
Well, I was really surprised at some of the mischaracterizations and misleading information that you heard. Did you all get a chance to see the short email I sent earlier about confidential information?
No. Sorry, we're way behind on email. in the
Yeah,
last
That's right. Okay. This is very important and reasonably quick, and I won't take too much of your time, but we
Is it-
deal with the most confidential information in state government every single day. Tax information, personnel information, HIPAA information, you name it, we've had it. And 10 years we've had it. Nobody has ever challenged the integrity of this office and its ability, willingness, and desire to protect confidential information, ever. To be clear, I read some of Ledge Counsel's presentation to you about the Public Records Act. He didn't tell you a couple of things. First of all, we've been advised by the Attorney General twice, Bill Sorrell and TJ, and I haven't had a chance to talk to Charity about it, that if in the course of our work, we obtain information that is deemed confidential by the entity that gave it to us, whether it's a department or something else, then we treat it exactly as they describe it, period. What I sent you were 3 pages from our professional standards manual about how we handle confidential information. There are other sections about how we can report it. Clearly, we can't disclose confidential information, but there are times when the state itself needs to know what we learn. So those are either held confidential on the other end or redacted or some combination of both. Furthermore, the toughest data to get is tax. And the tax department has provided us with individual and corporate income tax information on many occasions On some of those occasions, we've signed MOUs at their request. In any case, I take this very seriously, and I'm troubled. One of the folks who testified the other day said that as a political entity, I cannot be trusted. I'm paraphrasing, of course. Well, I think one of the people who said that is an appointee of the governor. We're all political to some extent, and I've got a record of dealing with confidential information. We have a professional standards manual that our professional auditors are required to adhere to. And it's the same as what's called the Yellow Book from OMB and GAO. This is real serious stuff that I don't take lightly. For example, with regard to business records, I did some work on VEPSI, on the Veggie program, and got all of the information provided by 5 different companies, including some arguably confidential information. They treat it that way. But because they did, I did. That's what we do. Furthermore, if an agency gives us information, just because they've shared it with us doesn't mean it becomes a public record. If they deem it confidential, then it remains confidential. And if somebody comes to me and said, oh, auditor, you have this document, I want it. I say to them, on advice of the AG, it's not my document. You need to go to the custodian of the document, which is Department X. And the AG has said on many occasions, if I do that, they will defend us in court. So I have to live with that, and it's fine with me. I have no problem at all. Commissioner Fitch also said that we could rely on the department, who has a contract with an entity for personal services, to get information for us. Well, that sounds okay to people who aren't working in my office, but the state auditor, an independent constitutional officer, should not have to rely on a bureaucrat to get me information to do the work that I was elected to do. That's wrong, in my opinion. In fact, we learned that last time when DEVA would not give us what we asked for OneCare. The idea or the suggestion that potential bidders might be frustrated or concerned or disincentivized to seek work with state government is both speculative and bizarre to me. Attachment C, item 13, has been attached to every single contract with the state of Vermont for decades. Every entity that has entered into a contract with the state knows from that provision in attachment C that they are required to retain and provide records related to their performance under the contract. Until OneCare, not one entity has ever questioned that. I'm sorry, is there a question?
No, keep going, unless
Okay.
Sorry, can I just clarify that OneCare was the first entity to question this?
Yes. And I should add that not only do we routinely get information, not just from departments and agencies, but sometimes if there's a reason to pass through to a contractor, we do that routinely as well. But as we put in one of our briefs to the court, we have requested and obtained accounting and payroll records on 7 occasions just during my tenure. You didn't know that because, wait, I didn't make it public.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So that frustrates me a lot. I think it was Mr. Musgrave who said, we just want it to be the way it is in attachment C. Well, I think Mr. Musgrave and perhaps others are unclear about the court's decision. The court didn't only say that the contract with OneCare, which did say explicitly, if asked, OneCare has to provide the records to an agent of the state. What the court said is that I'm not an agent of the state because they didn't mention the state auditor explicitly. The court also said that attachment C, even though it's very clear, the intent of item 13, which is to allow the auditor to do work, didn't mention the auditor explicitly, so therefore irrelevant, can't get information through that part of the contract. So for someone to say we want to leave it the way it is now, they've not read the decision. The decision completely invalidates the auditor's access to records through attachment C. For some who might say, this isn't a big deal, that somebody has sold this as a small bill, I think this is an existential threat to my office. I would guess that about half of the work of state government is done through contracts. I can't believe that it was the intent of your predecessors when they wrote 32-163 to exclude that much work done on behalf of taxpayers from the work of the state auditor. That is inconceivable to me. And if that's your wish, You have the power to do that. If you do, I'll be, well, more than sad.
More than sad.
That's a bad, you don't want to go there. That's a bad place.
Well, we are in a couple minutes going to hear from our legislative counsel who's going to walk us through a little bit the court case, because we actually haven't had a chance to do that yet because our scheduling keeps getting off. So that I think will be helpful. And one of the questions that has come up is in the course of open records, requests, who in your office handles that? Or not, I don't need the name of the person, but like, how does your office handle those open records requests when you do get them, just in general?
I handle all of them.
You
Every
handle
single
all of
one.
them. Okay. And
I should also add that I caught the end of a little testimony, I guess it was Mike prior to me. This idea, I don't know, maybe it was Representative Watson, this idea that you can parse the types of contracts and say, well, that one's okay for access and these aren't because they're the result of an RFP. That is not the way it works for us. You can't cut state government into pieces and say the auditor can and should have access to anything related to that, but not that. It's either everything or it's really a mistake. You can't anticipate what the needs will be for me or my successors at all.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the representative from the Hospital Association complained about the possibility in the future of hospitals being audited. Oh my goodness, when did we decide that hospitals aren't accountable if they use public funds?
Yes.
That struck me as troubling. And yes, we have the Green Mountain Care Board, but the Green Mountain Care Board, historically, who knows where this new mix of members are going to go. There's a lot of questions they did not ask of the hospitals or OneCare. They're doing their job as they define it. That's their business. The state auditor has the authority to make those choices. He or she has that prerogative. If you parse this information into RFP or not our RFP, you're cutting out an awful lot of stuff. There is no risk here.
Mr. Auditor, I have one more question. We are, if you look at the bill, if you could look at the bill and the paragraph, the new paragraph 13 that is added.
On page 2.
It is on page 2.
I don't have it open at the moment, but I know what you're referring to.
Okay, and it has the list of records, accounts, books, papers, reports, and returns in all formats.
That is exactly the same language that's up top in the same statute.
Yeah, okay, so this is repeating the language that's already there.
Yep.
Okay. I will look that up. Okay. And so just so you know, in terms of our timeline, we are going to hear from our legislative counsel. It looks like I have a request from one other witness, but assuming that things go well, we are going to try to mark up the bill on Tuesday and possibly vote on it. Just a heads up on that, unless something comes up, but and
one more thing. I'm sorry. There was some testimony the other day about, oh my God, the auditor's coming for your bank account and your profit. That is not true. The only information that is ever of interest to our office is about performance under the terms of the contract, period. Profit has nothing to do with that. And these are not financial audits, so we have no need for bank accounts, none. As for the personnel issue, OneCare gave very different information to the board from one year to the next. The amount of money that they proposed for payroll went up by a dramatic amount. That contract with OneCare through DEVA contains a bunch of deliverables that require actions by OneCare staff. We were interested in how OneCare was allocating human resources. That's all. We didn't want their personnel records. We had no need for that. This was just about the allocation of resources within the organization to accomplish the deliverables in the contract, period. A lot of misinformation here.
I'm looking at the statute now. You said it's the same language as up above. Could you tell me where?
163A.
A, 163. Okay, I'm gonna actually ask our legislative council attorney who just walked in the room, but, okay.
I
Thank
will
you
get
so
it for
much.
you right, I will get it for you in 10 seconds. Hang on.
Yeah, I don't see it, just scanning it, but
It's
that's okay.
32.
I will find that from our attorney. Thank you, Doug. I appreciate your time, and we're gonna move on to our attorney because her time is super tight this afternoon. So, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Becky, come on up.
Sorry, I'm earlier.
No, you're totally fine. So this first question is in the bill itself, in paragraph 13, the list of, it says records, accounts, books, papers, and reports and returns in all formats. And we were just discussing that, and the auditor said that that is the same language that's already in statute in another section.
Yeah, so it's actually, if you look in section 2 of the bill, in section 32 VSA 167, subsection, sorry, for the record, Becky Wasserman, legislative counsel. Subsection A allows for the auditor to examine and audit all the records, accounts, books, papers, reports, and returns in all formats, all departments, institutions, and agencies of the state. I don't know if there's another subdivision in 163 off the top of my head. I would have to just look it up, because there is, as you'll notice, there's those asterisks on line 11, which indicates that there are subdivisions missing. So I just would have to look it up, and I can get back to you if there's a reference.
Okay, yeah, if you can, I was looking in a different section. When he said it's above, I was looking in this above in the statutes, above 13 in the statutes, and I think what he was referring to was above in the bill.
It's right here in the bill.
Yeah, it's in the bill, but I was looking for it in the statute.
I know,
and
but we
so,
all, I think.
So, okay, that's helpful. Senator White, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Hardy. So bulletin 3.5, where is that? Where would you find that?
That is an executive branch. It's the Secretary of Administration adopts procedures, and that is bulletin 3.5 deals with the state contracts.
And I think it's on our website if you want to look at it. They sent it to us.
So it's not something that we would have in statute then?
No, it's not in statute. It's also, I think, on the BGS's Office of Purchasing and Contracting website. There's all the procedures. There's ones for grants as well, and then there's all the sort of standard contracting templates.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's more like administrative procedures than rule or statute.
Okay, so if I could just say this out loud so I can check that I'm understanding properly. The argument that we heard from BGS on this language was that they have bulletin 3.5 already, so this is not good for that. But it's not in statute, so that's something they could change at any time.
Yeah, we
our
certainly, the
notice,
administration
so-
could change it at any time,
So
yes.
there isn't a requirement in statute for them to actually do the things that they could change that at any point. And I guess my concern is if it's not in statute, and the argument that we heard from BGS was we already do this kind of depth of research on all of our bids. That's still, like, I appreciate the language that we are adding, because I'm concerned that the changeability of bulletin 3.5 means that they could just do that, and then we'd be back to square one. So have we ever put something like that in statute before?
Sorry, put that, telling the administration to amend bulletin 3.5.
Or could we make it so that they have to do that? Or maybe I'm.
Well, so I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, there are requirements, some of which stem from statutes and some from rules about state contracts and what has to be required in state contracts and how the state oversees contracts and this sort of paperwork and procedures and processes related to contracts. And some of that is in statute at a high level, and then it gets more specific in rule, and then even more specific in procedure.
Okay.
So that's the sort of level that we're dealing with. I think the issue, and this is a good segue to what I was hoping you could help us with, is that there was a court case that OneCare said we don't need to respond to the auditor to get this information, and the findings of the court were that they believed OneCare was right because we didn't explicitly, the legislature didn't explicitly say in statute that the auditor should have access to these types of records. So even if it's in bulletin 3.5, the court found that the auditor shouldn't have access because it's not explicitly on the face of the statutes allowed. So, but go ahead and tell us, we're gonna hear from Becky because her time is tight. So, yeah.
So I guess I can address that as I summarize the case, but as you know, the auditor requested certain payroll records from OneCare. OneCare did not share that information, and so the auditor, after I think multiple requests, the auditor brought sort of a breach of contract claim against them to say, OneCare had a contract with DEVA, and in the contract with DEVA, there were provisions that said that essentially a representative of the state could have access to the records of the contractor. At the same time, there's also state standard contract provisions that are attached to all state contracts. And that is usually attachment C. And so attachment C also has some language that says that, records available for audit, and that the contractor has to sort of maintain any records pertaining to the performance of the contract, and then have those records available for 3 years for inspection by any authorized representative of the state or federal government. So the auditor's argument was both that under statute, which is this section that you were just looking at that says that the auditor has the ability to audit every department, institution, and agency of the state, and under these contractual provisions that they are, should have been permitted to look at the records. So the court said under both of those sources of authority that the auditor did not have the ability to, neither of those authorities gave the auditor that ability to do the audit. So they looked at statute, and what they said about that section 163 was that the language of the statute says that the auditor can do an audit of every department, institution, and agency of the state, but it is not specific to, OneCare was a contractor contracting with the state, so that is not, a state agency. Question.
But it is a state contract.
Wait, is this a clarifying question?
Kind of.
Housekeeping?
Yeah, so the authority that's being asked for, are there other government officials that are named and do have this authority currently? Because what I'm hearing is the auditor wasn't explicitly named, so does that mean others are?
So, I think arguably if DEVA wanted to, because they were the one who was contracting. So I don't think actually anyone was named as an authorized representative in those sections, but if the state entity that was like contracting with OneCare had requested those documents, you know, I don't know how the court would have decided, but I think that there would have been an argument there that, you know, they were the ones who were, had entered into the contract with them, so that would have been different. But I think the court was saying, you know, there's nowhere in the contract that says the auditor is considered an authorized representative here. And even when you look to the statute, the auditor, you know, they have their sort of a constitutional authority to audit, but statute sort of says that's for the state agencies and departments, not for contractors with the state.
Senator, Clarkson.
Whatever she is.
Friday afternoon.
However, the job of the auditor is to be our watchdog, our Cerberus at the gates, protecting all public state money. So our public state money is embedded and is in those, every one of those contracts, not just with, I mean, it's to me the auditor's authority is much broader than just looking at state agencies. I mean, we contract every one of those state agencies and departments is contracting on a regular basis with outside entities that are not instruments of the state that he is able to audit. So it makes, and one of my question is, who was the contractor with OneCare? Was it Green Mountain Care Board?
DEVA.
Oh, it was DEVA, okay.
Yeah, and I think one of the arguments that OneCare made was that DEVA's right to access the records was limited to their performance under the agreement, and the information that the auditor was requesting was payroll information. So they were sort of arguing that didn't even fall into what would have been accessible to DEVA. Again, DEVA wasn't the one requesting the information, so I don't know how that would have played out.
I guess it depends on what the contract was for. Because
but I think the point is, this is what we're changing this.
yes,
Yeah.
you're here.
So are there other things about the case that you think we should know that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the court really just highlighted that the contract, you know, didn't define who is an authorized representative, and that is, you know, specific to that contract with DEVA, but also when you look to attachment C, which is a state standard contract provisions, it's also in that provision where it just says authorized representatives. So that is a reason why, if you were going to ask the administration to update Bulletin 3.5, if you're choosing to give the auditor this authority, you know, directing them to update Bulletin 3.5 to sort of make it clear that the auditor is, you know, essentially that authorized representative who can do these audits, was just one of the places that the court noticed it wasn't sort of explicit that they have that authority.
So is that is not in the, what is in the bill?
So this was where I made a mistake, and it's in the House version and not the Senate version. And I believe I sent the House version, which might be posted on your web just for reference.
Okay, so wait, first of all, any other questions about the case before we move into this? Okay.
So they ruled for OneCare against the auditor,
Yes.
which was so distressing.
Well, and that's why we have the
Yes,
bill,
and that's
so.
why we're here.
And I would say that the court does go on to say in the case that the legislature knows how to provide authority when they want to. So I think that is.
Ooh, that was.
And they point to other statutory sections where the auditor does have more explicit oversight, audit authority for other entities. And so they go on to say, you know, the legislature gave, you know, the auditor the power to examine records of county sheriff's departments, the Office of the Defender General, the Public Power Supply Authority. So, you know, if the legislature wants the auditor to have this authority, they know how to do that.
Yeah, and I actually had a conversation directly with Justice Waples about this case because I'm on judicial retention. She's like, you won't?
Yeah.
Okay, Senator Bielski.
In the places that you named, the sheriff's defender generals, does the auditor have the same kind of access that we would be granting in this? Because I mean, and if it's helpful, I'll tell you why I'm asking the question, because it sort of goes to proof that the auditor already has access to the types of information people have been worried about, and it hasn't been a problem.
Right, and he discussed that.
Yeah, so the case, I don't want to speak off the cuff and say it's exactly the same, so I'd have to go back and look at it. I mean, it does say in the case that the auditor has the power to examine the records of those agencies. I don't know if it exactly lines up to what's in here, so I'll have to look at that. The court also noted that the auditor is empowered to review contracts, privatizing services previously provided by state employees, so that's under the privatization contract section of law. So it's, and as part of that is reviewing some financial information also for the veggie program. So there are different authorities throughout statute for different entities, and I can get you sort of a list of that and what those authorities are.
So, and are you, the list of in the bill that I mentioned at the outset, the records, accounts, books, papers, reports, and returns, that does fall in above in paragraph C. And is that a sort of standard list?
I think the intent here was that it would follow the authority in 167, which gives the auditor the ability to, for the purpose of examination and audit, the ability to look at all of those types of records when they are doing an audit. So it was matching what the auditor can do in those other circumstances, but specifically for contractors.
Okay.
And with the limitation that it has to be relevant to the contract with the state, not just any
books, records.
accounts,
Okay.
the contract.
And I don't see on our site where, did the House bill get posted on our website? No, it's okay. I just want to see. All I'm seeing is.
Where is that language, Becky, in the House bill?
It's in H24.
No,
So,
but what is it, what section, where is it in the bill?
sorry,
Is it
record?
section 3, is it
the record section or the bulletin 3.5?
yeah, the bulletin 3.5?
Oh, so that is not in the Senate version of the bill.
I realize.
Okay,
Where?
It's
where
in
is it?
section
It was in
1.
here. What section would it be?
it's in section 1 of the House bill.
So it would be an additional section 1, a piece of section
Okay, it's
H. It's H1?
24.
H20. Ooh, something put in early.
page 24. Here we go.
Okay.
State contracting secretary administration audit authority, that.
Here it is.
Okay. Well, how do people feel about adding that language to S9? On or before October 1st, 2023, the Secretary of Administration shall include in Administrative Bulletin 3.5 a requirement that state contracts include terms and conditions authorizing the state auditor to have the discretion to examine records, books, blah, 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 blah.
Same
Okay.
language. Yeah.
Okay, and are there other changes we want to ask Becky to make in the version? And our people, I did have one other witness who wanted to speak on the bill before we voted, and Chris Delia, and I will let him come in on Tuesday. And are there other people we want to hear from or questions we need answers before we do final markup?
I have a question that maybe you can answer, Becky, but I might also have to get in touch with Tucker, but is the Department of Vermont Health Access a FOIA-able entity?
Oh,
I think they're a public agency, so you can make a public records request, whether, I don't know, depending on what you're requesting, some of the information may be exempt from.
Yes. And we got a lengthy
Yes.
description of that. I just, and this is more committee, but I just, we've been having a lot of conversation about worry about the auditor having this, but if the Department of Vermont Health Access maybe could have had it anyways, that they're also FOIA-able, like, it feels like there's a lot of places where we're explicitly pointing to like, well, it's a problem if the auditor has it, but someone else could have it with all the same things going on. So
and all the same requirements.
Well,
right.
Yeah.
that's kind of my point.
That was the question I was asking about the Green Mountain Care Board, because the Green Mountain Care Board has all this information about hospitals, for example. But and probably Agency of Transportation probably has a lot of the same information for those kinds of. Excellent. I think we're set. I think we have this on our schedule for Tuesday. Hopefully you've got it on yours.
I do,
Okay.
yeah.
If you could bring us back a new draft with that section added, that would be helpful. Thank you so much. And wow, the sun is actually shining. So thank you for bringing that with you. And have a good weekend. I think we are set, so we can go off